You're listening to China Manufacturing Decoded from the Sofeast Group.
Hello, welcome back to the podcast, episode 305. Today, Adrian hosting. Paul Adams joins me. Hi, Paul.
Hello, Adrian. Good to be back.
Paul, needed you to join me today because we're answering an important question, which is, can you afford to manufacture a new product? I think a lot of people have a product idea, but can they really afford to take it from what is just a sketch on a napkin through to mass production, which is an incredible journey? And whether listeners are going to say, okay, I'm actually ready for this. I do think I've got the budget. I'm, my mindset is right for this. Or, oh no, I'm not ready. I've got to go back and actually do some work on this yet. So we're going to look at the kind of journey from idea to mass production. So design, prototyping, tooling, pilot runs, some of the myths. I know you like a bit of myth busting. So myths that make people commonly underestimate costs, maybe by as much as 2 or 3 times. Could be more, could be less. Yeah, and just some ideas of what we need to be checking to be ready at the end. That's a lot to fit into around half an hour, Paul, but I know you are equal to that. So the first section, the myth busting about why so many people underestimate costs.
Yeah, I just want to get into this. There's two types of people really that sort of come through the door or really look at contract manufacturing. That's the startup. In other words, it's their first rodeo and doing this. And I guess this would be more of an interest to anybody that fits within that criteria, as opposed to someone that's more established and that's looking to expand their portfolio. In other words, they've been around the sort of loop a couple of times already. So, but let's look at a couple of the myths to start with, because that's always a good icebreaker, let's say. So it's really sort of difficult to gauge if you've never done anything. So what you tend to do is do some research. Now, if you're researching in the wrong area, then you're going to get the wrong idea in your own mind, and I think this is where some of the myths stand out, really, because people have got the wrong end of the stick, or led with or fed the wrong information and got the wrong information in their mind. So it's basically looking at, the first one would be, all I need to do is find a factory, right? They'll give me a unit price, and that's all I need. Okay, that one goes straight into production. Bearing in mind that I've got a product idea, or you may even have your first prototype. Okay, so the first assumption or myth that we need to break is that the unit price, that's my cost. No, it's not, basically. So the reality is that if you're looking at the MOQ, because generally the minimum order quantity when we're talking about MOQs, multiply that by the unit price plus some shipping is what you're thinking is what your overall cost is. You're actually forgetting a lot of things. Things like engineering in order to get from your prototype into tooling. The tooling cost itself. Now, we're not going to cover tooling because we've done tooling multiple times on this, talking about costs and everything, and how detailed tooling is and the costs of that. We're then looking at testing, certification. We're actually looking at scrap rates, or what we call loss rates. Working capital. Do you need jigs and fixtures and special equipment in order to put your product together? Does it need some automation? So it's not by far the MOQ times the price plus shipping. Okay, so that's the first thing. You're missing so much more of the equation than just those 3 elements. Okay, so that's the first myth. Another one would be, I've got a good idea. I've got a fantastic idea. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a crowdsourcing or crowdfunding campaign on various different platforms that are available, and that's going to pay for everything. So we're all going to be good. As long as I knock this one out of the park, then I'm going to be into sort of production within 6 months. Okay. Well, Depends, and it depends. And I've got some sort of really, really good case studies, which I can round down to around 30 seconds for you. But crowdfunding, that will give you, your sort of funding to start with. So, which is really, really good. Now, where it comes unstuck is it rarely covers all the costs. Okay, especially the unplanned delays, the redesigns that are not taken into consideration, the failures when it comes to compliance testing, okay, and various different other aspects that are not taken into consideration. Now,
Mm.
the golden rule here is just because it's funding, it's not meaning it's a guarantee. Okay, now here's that 30 seconds case study. Crowdfunding successful, $2 million raised. The company had already had the product. It was a transfer product from an unsuccessful contract manufacturer. They transferred it to us, let's say. Compliance was a nightmare. They tried to rush from what they thought was a mature product into production. And during that rush, there was push, push, push. Let's go to production, and everything come unstuck. I mean, like spectacularly come unstuck. With a lot of issues with respect to tooling, now the components fit, some of the specifications were wrong, compliance failure, and at the end of the day, that $2 million was burnt up, and they could not move any further. Okay, so
Right.
that's a quick case study in hand for the first 30 seconds. So crowdfunding is not the golden bullet. Okay, bear that in mind. YouTube, what a fantastic place to go and find information. Okay, so you can imagine I need to build a product in China. I need to find a contract manufacturer. How much is it going to cost me? So YouTube, a couple of guys on there said, yeah, well, we've done this actually. And we launched a product really, really quickly and it cost $10,000. It was great. It's fantastic. Okay. But what they're not telling you is the fine details. Now, what they're probably doing there is private labeling a product. Take a salt and pepper electric grinder, for example. Okay.
Yep.
So they probably did not go and develop that from scratch. What they probably done is found a manufacturer of such device, made a few minor modifications, put their own brand on it, made some own packaging, and away you go. $10,000 and away we go. We're up and running. Okay. So we're not looking at that when it comes to developing your own product and putting it through the process, the NPI process, new product introduction process, and getting that into mass production. Okay, that is not going to work with $10,000, I tell you now. So even if you say, well, that's all the budget I've got, I need to cut corners. Well, that's a recipe for disaster. If you cut corners, you're going to enter the area of introducing errors. Because you're cutting corners. You're not going to test anything. So therefore, you're going to get product returns because it's failing in the field. So all of these things are like big red flags with respect to you need to get educated correctly. Okay. And also that another one I want to talk about is, and I see this time and time, and I hear it time and time again, is don't worry about the reliability. We'll fix that later on. Okay. I'll rush into production, and so I'll fix everything as we move forward in the next batch. Okay. Well, like I just said, if you're cutting corners, you're introducing the area of risk with respect to failures in the field. Now, a failure in the field is a very, very expensive mistake to cover. You're looking at returns, refunds, broken trust, brand. You're going to kill your brand because of bad reputation, bad reviews. Just because we'll fix it later attitude is really a bad way to move forward. Follow the process, okay. Even if it takes a little bit longer, that you're going to be able to launch a product that is reliable and fit for purpose when it goes into the market. Okay, I've got one more for you, then we can move on, Adrian.
Yep.
We've already got a mold, okay? So let's just go straight to production. Okay? We're going to transfer my mold from where it is at the moment, straight to you, straight to mass production. No messing around. Okay? As soon as it lands, bang, straight in. Okay? No, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. Just because you got a mold from one factory, and that could be in China, okay, it could be in China, and 9 times out of 10, it's a transfer between sort of one supplier in China to another. Okay, you have to go through that validation process again, simply because those tools will be run in what I was going to say slightly. It's a totally different environment. Okay,
Mm.
different machines, right? Different working environment. The polymer may come from a different supplier. The operating guys, for sure, they will be different. So therefore, they've got their own idiosyncrasies with respect to setting up the machines, etc., etc. So you have to go through at least one pilot run just to make sure the tools are running correctly and producing the parts to specification in order to then move into mass production. Okay, so there's just that one critical step. That critical step is a must-have. Okay, so that's and again, if you miss that, you're potentially introducing a lot of risk and error into that production build when you go to mass production. Okay,
Mm.
I think there was sort of 5 myths there that I'm hoping that you've listened to. I thought, actually, yes, one of those I could relate to. Noted.
And, and in all of these myths, you're outlining, okay, fine. You might be thinking this, but what you're not thinking about is, and all of the stuff that you've been saying. Now, doing all of these things the right way costs money. So when we're looking holistically at the whole bigger picture of whether you can afford to manufacture a new product from scratch, we are kind of like following the money. And in order to do things properly, it involves different costs. So hopefully, as we now go through, right, what we need to do, we need to look at the phases that we go through from idea to mass production. And at Agilian and in the Sofeast group more generally, we have an MPI, new product introduction process, that we work to, and it has 6 phases that basically cover from idea to mass production. And so the next step is to go through these 6 phases and kind of tell the listeners where the money goes in each phase. And I suppose let's specify we're talking more generally about electromechanical products that we would generally be working on. Specialist things like aeronautical or medical and things like that, they have their own intricacies and requirements and costs. So that's not what we're going into here, Paul, right? But the bigger picture cost map, let's map those costs to the 6 NPI phases.
Yeah. So I'm not actually going to put a dollar value. I'll try and relate this into a percentage of split over the phases. Let's say.
Okay.
So which because every single product's different. Okay.
Yeah.
You could be going from kids pacifier to a robot. Okay. Very, very, very different sort of spectrums, different ends of the spectrum. So, but the percentage will be about there. They're about the same. Okay. So, yes, you're right. MPI. I did mention that earlier. You sort of touched on that again, Adrian, and that's really important. That any new project coming through any contract manufacturer has to follow the new product introduction process, or an MPI process. So when you're looking for a contract manufacturer, make sure that you've got a very reliable, trustworthy, and solid MPI plan in place. Otherwise, you're asking for trouble. So luckily, we do have one. So the first phase is really all about a feasibility. Okay. And this is where we're turning your idea into a clear, actionable plan. Okay. So that includes sometimes a proof of concept. Okay. And that proof of concept can simply be a rendering. We're taking that rendering into maybe a cardboard model, something as rudimentary as that, but at least that allows us to actually say, you know what? Yeah, this has got some legs. Let's run with it. Or hold on a minute. We haven't really thought this one through. This is not going to work at all. Let's go back and look at a slightly different approach until we do find something that does actually work with respect to what your idea is, and we can match up and move forward. Okay. I'll come on to the percentages later, so otherwise I'll break my flow, if that's all right, Adrian.
Sure.
Once the sort of feasibility study's done, and that's going to include, like I said, maybe that very rudimentary prototype. It's going to look at the design architecture. We're looking at more of a plan point of view with respect to a rough outline, with respect to the different phases going to take so many weeks or months or whatever the case may be. So we've got a rough ballpark of where we are. Then we can start to apply different cost models to each of those phases, which I'll come to in a minute. And again, like I mentioned, generally we are talking about consumer electronic products. Okay. Things like a toaster, things like, I don't know, consumer electronics. Okay. So plastic moldings, PCBs inside, a few buttons, maybe a display. Okay. So this is the type of product that will go through this process, right? And if it's followed correctly, right, you'll come out the other end with a really reliable product that you can sell and get into mass production. Okay. So the feasibility, making sure the product can be produced. Okay. With a very broad outline of a plan and some ballpark numbers from a costing point of view. Second phase is all about prototyping. Okay. And this is where we take some time to actually look at the design work. We'll do some industrial design. We'll do engineering design. We'll start with the CAD model. Okay. Once we've got that CAD model, then we can actually go to the 3D printers and actually start to build out and the mechanical design. From an electronics point of view, maybe we're working with a breadboard or the ESP32 sort of chip in order to get the initial program up and running, just so we can get something sort of feasible up and running and turn it into a workable prototype. Now, at this stage, we are looking at different types of prototype, and I think we've already covered this in the previous podcast, Adrian, the different types of prototype that are available. But the first one will certainly be one step above the feasibility. In other words, we're not talking about cardboard models anymore. We're talking about a product that actually functions. Okay. Another step up from that would be a marketing style prototype in branded colors and maybe a printed logo or something like this. But here we are looking at building prototypes. Why? So we can validate the design and make sure that it is okay before we move into the real validation, which is phase 3, which is more of a testing. Okay. Here we're looking at design for manufacturing aspect. We're looking at, can it be molded? Can it be assembled? Look at the process. Okay. So we're looking at all of these features. We're talking to specialist suppliers with respect to, can this product be made? Specialist suppliers. We're talking about injection mold guys. We're talking about the tooling. We're talking about the polymer that is going to be used. We're talking about the various different chips that are available on the PCB that need to be used in order to provide the correct information from the product and making sure that works. And this is where we're actually going to draw the line under it. And this is where a lot of the NRE or non-recurring engineering costs are used up in these first 3 phases. Okay. And this takes up a chunk of money that people don't even consider to start with. Okay. Because we were talking about earlier, the 10 grand can get me into mass production, or, I've got an idea, let's go to tooling. Well, what about all of these phases here? These first 3 phases are so important, and they do take up, unfortunately, they do take up time. And time meaning, skilled engineers, sometimes multiple engineers. If it's a complex product, you need sort of a different team to work on that development. Okay, so you're looking at the mechanical guy, maybe a mechanical assistant. You're looking at the software guy. You're looking at the hardware. In other words, the PCB designer. You're looking at the software. You're looking at the firmware. Now you're looking at a test engineer. You're looking at the project manager. You're looking at the core team have to do things in order to move the product forward. Okay, and that comes at a cost. So, and this
I mean, if you go to the factory to check on your project. You know, you're going to see guys sitting around a prototype, a couple of guys maybe for hours trying to fit a motor into the space and make sure that it works properly and doesn't overheat and whatever. And I mean, this could be like half a day's work for them.
Oh, exactly. Exactly. You know, and particularly when we're going into the first part of the, phase 2 and the phase 3, the prototype stage, and then the validation stage, it's nothing's guaranteed to work straight out of the box. Okay. And sometimes, it works, but it needs some fine tuning, and it's going to be this 80-20 rule. So most of it can be done in the 80% of it, and it's all, shoom, very, very quick. Yeah. The time is like fine tuning that final 20%, getting everything right, and that's generally the case, so we make really, really good progress right up until the last, 20%, where we're trying to find the issues that are preventing the product from working correctly, et cetera, et cetera. So a big chunk of the money is. Okay, another big chunk of money. Sorry, go on, Adrian.
So that's those first 3 phases, right? And that's before you even get to the point where you can start producing stuff on a production line. You got to get over that hump first. And so what you're saying is, from a managing expectations perspective, the bulk of your costs, actually, they're kind of front loaded.
Well, I'll give you the numbers now. Okay. So the first 3 phases are around 40% of your total budget. Okay. 40% of your total budget are used up in the first 3 phases. Now, obviously not in the first phase, because that's feasibility, and we're doing some research and making sure the chips are available, and so the polymers are going to last if it's used in a certain environment, etc. But phase 2 and phase 3, that prototype and validation phase, that's a lot of time and a lot of effort goes into creating the product to meet the specification and the requirements set down by the customer. Okay. 40% of your total budget is used up in the first 3. Okay. So, or thereabouts. Thereabouts. All right. Where was I? The next phase. Again, don't be surprised. This is where you need to get your checkbook out, and this is where you write your checks, your big checks. This is tooling. Okay. We talked about tooling before and what the complex, or how complex the tooling is, and why it's so expensive. Okay.
Yes.
If you are looking at a consumer electronics product, don't be surprised if you need to fork out for 4 to 10 injection mold tools, for example. Okay. And these are a decent sized chunks of steel. So again, we're looking at maybe 30% of the total budget goes on tooling, depending on the size of the product and the complexity of the injection mold parts, or steel stamped parts, for example. Again, tooling. But it's generally write your big check to start with, the tooling you get done. You then go into the next stage, which is making sure that everything is done. Well, it's not the next stage, it's tooling and tooling validation. Okay. So this is where we make the tool. We produce the parts from the tool, and we go through T0, T1, T2, 3. We've already talked about that in a previous one. I know we have. And then you get the parts that are fit for production. In other words, you've signed them off, and there's the tool's been validated. Okay. And that's when you pay your second part of the tooling. So in one phase, you're writing out 2 checks for big chunks of money. Okay. Around 30% of your total budget. Okay.
Yeah, that's expensive.
You then need to prepare yourself, because we're going into more big money. It's pre-production. Now, okay, can we skip pre-production? Well, the answer is no. Okay, we cannot skip pre-production. And again, this is one of those myths that I didn't talk about earlier, but I sort of did. Can we go straight to mass production? We need to validate the product goes together for a number of different reasons. Okay, if this is being built in a factory, okay, on the shop floor, this is going to be the first time, or potentially they've been introduced before, but in essence, it's going to be the first time the shop workers or the shop floor workers are going to be putting this together. Okay, so they need to be educated on how to assemble each component as it goes down the production line. Okay, they're going to be following standard operating procedures or work instructions. Okay, now this pre-production is super, super important for one, training the operators, but two, validating that we have the process correct to start with. Okay, standard operating procedures often get updated during this phase in order to make the assembly or the process better. Okay, so if someone's following the process and you think, hold on a minute, he's doing that backwards. He's using he's crossing his arms. He shouldn't be doing that when he's putting two screws in. It should be like this. Let's change the operating procedure because he's following the instructions. So this is really, really critical. It also allows us to get final products and test them as they would be for mass production. Now, what we generally say and rule of thumb is these are not sellable products. Okay, they are for certification, they are for sales and marketing, they are for early field adopters. Okay, we're not going to be building 100 units and you're going to sell 100 units. No, that's not the idea. Like I said, training, certification, compliance, reliability, early adopters, and some marketing stuff. Okay, this is what your pre-production is all about. Super, super important. Okay, and then we go into mass production when we've actually signed everything off, everything's looking good. But then you need to make sure that you have the budget in order to place the orders for whatever quantity you see fit for. Now, generally, we say to people, don't go from mass pre-production to 1 or 2 containers straight out the gate. Okay, ramp into it slowly, because statistically, we would not have found all of the issues from that pre-production run. There's still issues out there we don't know. If you don't know, you don't know, and they're there. Trust me, they're there, and they will only come with volume. Okay, so ramp up the volume slowly until we're pretty confident that we've actually ticked off all of the boxes from, here's an issue we didn't see before, but we got that one covered this time round. Okay, but you need to have the funds in order to purchase all of the components in order to go through that mass production. Okay, so if you've blown your budget before you get mass production, how are you going to order a container load? How are you going to order a pallet load? Okay, so again, we've used up 30 to 40% on the first 3 phases. Okay, around 30%, call it 30 and 30, so that's 60%. Another 20% on your pre-production, and the balance goes on the mass production. Okay, so that is your ratio with respect to making sure you've got the funds in order to do that. Now, you can see your $10,000 is not going to cut it.
No.
So not at all. And like I said, phases 1 to 3 are quite heavy. Phases 4, very heavy, when it comes to tooling. So your first 4 phases, you need to make sure you got the budget before you even start thinking about, you know what, I've got an idea. Let's go to a contract manufacturer and get this thing made. Okay, so you need to plan your budget very, very carefully and make sure that you've got enough in order to get at least past the first mass production run. Don't forget your marketing budget as well. Okay, a lot of people do this, get to mass production, go, yay, now we've got to try and sell it. Oh, I've got no money for ads, So again, very, very difficult thing to manage if you don't have the funds in place.
Yeah, and the ads don't come cheap these days either.
Well, no, they don't.
So from a managing expectations point of view, right, you've given now a breakdown in terms of 100% of your budget across these 6 phases. Hopefully everyone that's listening, they've now got some information to think, okay, I've got my budget, but have I really considered all of this work that needs to be done to get to the point of, pre-production, for example?
Yeah.
If there are items that Paul has discussed that you have not yet considered on your journey from idea to mass-produced product, then, well, the chances are then that's going to lead to a change in the budget that you need to have in place, because those have got to be catered for, right?
Well, I've just been through the 6 phases from an expectation point of view. let's try and go through each of these phases with what you can expect, okay, to happen from entering into contract manufacturing with respect to the idea to coming out the back end with successful mass production. Uh,
Mm.
so, like I said, we've got the 6 phases. Let's start with the phase 1, feasibility. So, what goes on there? This is all about gathering information. Okay, to start with, we need a specification. Okay, and that specification has to be clear. Now, what's not good is, well, I want it like the Apple white. We hear that so many times. Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. So what white is that then? I need a number. So basically what we're looking for is not descriptions, but specifications and details. Okay. So that's the first thing. Okay. And I don't want to hear, I want a really good looking product. I want a high quality product. Doesn't mean anything. Okay. It has to be specific. We need the numbers. Okay. The weight must not exceed 30 grams. Okay. When it's dropped from 70 centimeters, in other words, your waist height, it needs to withstand 10 drops. This is the type of detail we're looking for. Okay. This is called the product specification. Okay. Or product requirement. And we've got a document for that, i.e., it's the product requirement document. Okay. So, and again, this is something that we go through. It's a checklist with respect to what is the size, what is the weight, what's the features, what are the functions, etc., etc. Okay. What are the colors? So all of these are needs and must-haves before we actually start looking, okay, now we've got the specification. Is it feasible to actually produce something like this against this specification? Okay, so that's basically where we are from that point of view. So if you cannot provide specific, measurable specifications, you're not even ready to enter into phase 1.
Mm.
That's the first point. Okay. Phase 2, let's look at prototyping. Okay. Well, like I said, we make multiple prototypes at different levels at different times of the process itself. So to start with, we're going to go from that proof of concept. In other words, the Heath Robinson, throw it together. Yes, I've got some light coming out. Yes, I've got some sound coming out. Yes, it turns off. Yes, it turns on. Did we good to something more, a little bit more refined, where we've got a, a, a a demo board from an electronics point of view. Certainly not going to be the production unit, but at least it allows us to provide some functions into the sort of the product from a electronics point of view and software point of view. From the hardware point of view, we're not going to be going into tooling now. We're going to be going into different levels of 3D printing and prototyping. Some of these prototypes, we may say, you know what, I really will need a high tolerance on this part. So therefore, we're going to spend a little bit of money and go CNC machining. Okay.
Mm.
But at the end of the day, we need to get a fully functional prototype of the product itself to ensure that we can actually provide a checklist against the specification and a requirement from the first phase. Okay. Does it turn on? Yes. Does the heater reach 98 degrees? Yes. Does it turn off when I do this? Yes. And does X, Y, and Z work? No. Why not? Okay, let's dig into that and find out and get a root cause and a corrective action applied to that. So the prototype build is not just about making pretty looking products. It's all about making sure that a product is going to work before we go to the next phase. Okay. So we are looking at multiple prototypes generally in order to go through this. We're going to go, does it fit together? Does it work? These prototypes are going to be sent to you, the customer. You need to be able to test them. Therefore, we need to have one with us and always one with you. Never ever, and I say this to my guys and the core team all the time, when we're doing prototypes, make sure we have one here such that when the customer goes through it, we can go through it together and we understand exactly what's going on and what each other is talking about. Okay, so that's one thing there. So if you can't afford multiple rounds of prototypes at various different levels, again, you're not ready to go into phase 2.
Mm.
So that's a self-check from that point of view. Engineering validation. This is where the bulk of the money comes in, because we've built the prototype. Okay, now we need to go through this validation period, where we are looking at locking down the manufacturer design. Okay, what we don't want to be doing is going into tooling if we haven't finished the design work. Okay, a recipe for disaster unless certain components are absolutely 100% locked down. Okay, that's a safe bet. We can move forward with that. But these parts over here, absolutely no way. So we need to make sure that we're locked down on everything before we move into the next phase. So this is all about engineering validation. And this is
Yep.
where we're going to be looking at DFM work. We're going to be looking at running the product, maybe. And this is something that I've done just a couple of weeks ago, which is really, really cool. I had a 100% it was a 3D printed prototype. Okay, it did have the PCB, but it wasn't wired up correctly, and it was just thrown together. Let's say, for lack of a better term. But
Mm.
I took this 3D printed prototype down to one of the well-known compliance labs, worldwide known, but basically over here in China. I took the product down to them, explained to them with my Chinese colleague, which is very useful, that this was a prototype only, but we wanted to do a pre-scan on compliance. And they came up with a couple of things. We thought, oh, we missed that, which is really, really handy because we're still at the prototype stage. Okay. We're still at that engineering validation stage. So we went back. We then designed in the area that would have failed if we were going into tooling. Okay. Now, generally, once you go to tooling, like I said earlier, you then get that pre-production where you then pass products into compliance. And at that point, they would have said, you know what, guys, that's failed. Now we've got the opportunity before we've even cut any steel or anything like this from a tooling point of view to implement that change. So again, this is really, really important. And if you can't afford those multiple steps from a testing point of view, from people going out from the workshop down to an inspection lab, then you're not ready to go into this stage.
Mm.
Tooling validation. What we're looking at here. Well, this is the big one. This is where the checkbooks come out, like I mentioned earlier.
Mm.
Now, this is a non-recurring engineering cost or NRE. It's more like you own the product. Yeah. Okay. So you're going to be looking at cutting steel. Once you've cut the steel, I'm assuming injection molding here. Okay. I'm just going to blank that off. Let's just call it injection molding. But it does run over to everything else from electronics and steel and whatever we're doing. But call it injection molding. So we're going to be ordering the steel. We're going to go through the DFM and all of the process with respect to that. We're going to be assembling the tooling. We're going to be running the tooling. We're going to be making modifications on the tooling because the tooling never works first or right first time. If you listen to a previous episode, you'll know why. But we need to go through that process. In that process, we're going to be using up a lot of scrap material because we're going to be testing until the product's coming out of the tooling correctly. Okay. So if you haven't got the tooling budget, don't even think about ordering the tooling because you need to pay a percentage to start with, and then you'll need to pay for the final part of the tooling once it's signed off. Okay. So don't order it if you've only got half the money. Okay. So then your
Mm.
tooling is, it's not going anywhere. So, which is a nightmare. So that's what's going to be going on in the tooling stage. Now, pre-production, like I mentioned earlier, this is where we run that pilot batch. Okay. Super, super important because this is where we are paying to find out problems. Okay. Like I said, we are going to be building 40, call it 40 to 100 units. And from there, we're going to be training the operators. We're going to be understanding the process. And maybe we're going to be optimizing the process on how the product goes together. Okay. From there, we'll be able to get some quality control checklists together. We're going to be looking at process control. We're going to be looking at all of the in and out as well as in process quality. We're going to be looking at quality level standards. All of this needs to be done during that pre-production run before we get to mass production. During that pre-production, we're going to be highlighting a number of issues that we didn't find out during the production of the prototypes. Okay. But it's not going to uncover everything. Okay. Statistically, it's just impossible. Okay. Statistics matter when it comes to volume. Okay. And we're not in volume. In other words, we're not in mass production yet. So still expect some failures or issues when it comes to mass production. But during that pre-production stage, we are basically spending the money in order to build, train, verify quality control, verify the standard operating procedures, get the products into the lab in order to get that compliance done. Okay. We'll be able to get products to you, the customer, in order to do your sales and marketing photos and videos and unboxing and whatever the case may be. And this is really, really important stage to go through. A lot of people say, can't we just skip pre-production and go straight into mass production? No, the answer is no, you can't really. Okay. So that's pre-production. Now, this is where the rubber meets the road, as they say, mass production. Okay. Don't forget, it is not all about MOQ multiplied by the unit price plus some shipping. Okay, it's not. That is not the correct equation. We need to be looking at MOQ multiplied by the unit price, multiplied by the loss rate or the yield loss, multiplied by the labor overheads, and the quality control. And there's a lot to the equation in order to get to your final price of an X works. Okay, packaging, storage. Okay, all of these things need to take into consideration, and this is something you need to understand and work with the team or your contract manufacturer in order to understand what your costs will be when you go to mass production. Okay, so a lot of people go loss rate. What's all about? Well, it's stuff happens. Stuff comes in the door from the supplier. Supplier has made a couple of parts that are out of specification or been broken on the way over, whatever the case may be. They can't be used. They need to be replaced. Okay. So out of your 1,000, we've only got 998 now. Well, you need 1,000. So we need to go through and order some more. That's your loss rate. Okay. Everything has a loss rate associated with it. Okay. So make sure that your bill of materials is absolutely 100% detailed so that you know exactly what your money is required. In other words, planning for your budget planning. Okay. So they are the phases a little bit more fleshed out than the first time we went through that. But again, you can see each of these phases, there's a lot going on. And this is a very, 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 very high holistic overview of each of those phases. But you can you can see where the money is, where the phases go through.
Yep, absolutely. I hope you're listening and doing some self-reflection and coming to the conclusion, oh, okay, yeah, maybe I'm not ready. Or maybe this is confirming and validating that indeed you are ready to tackle all of these things. But nonetheless, all of these different activities and parts of the processes that you're mentioning, it all costs money. So one thing that's very important and an important takeaway from this episode is that in order to fund your journey from idea to mass production, you need to take into account a heck of a lot of different tasks within all of those different phases of the new product introduction process. And those all have to be accounted for in terms of budget. Because if you go into these things half-cocked, Paul, that's a recipe for all sorts of risks that you just don't want.
Well, that's right. I don't think anybody's looking for a failed project,
No.
failed product launch. We're not looking for that. And I know the customer's not looking for that. looking for that. So it's really best to plan ahead. And another thing, just on top of that, you got your budget all planned out. Throw an extra 20 or 30% on for contingency.
Hmm.
Because of that, it's always that unknown. It's always
Indeed.
that unknown.
Mm.
If you don't know, you don't know, but it's always lurking there in the background potentially. So yes, I really, really hope this helped. If you are embarking on your first project, it's a challenge. It's a scary challenge sometimes, but a highly rewarding one if you get into mass production and you manage to get your product as a winner. These are really fantastic times, and it's really great to see companies sort of grow through the help of the contract manufacturer they're working with. We've seen a lot
So
of them,
exciting.
and they're great success stories, really are.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you feel that you are ready, why not get in touch with us and share your concept and your budget? And, we can look at that with you, obviously subject to NDA and not sharing it with others and get that sort of help. And if you feel that you're not ready, well, what areas are you unsure about? Again, get in touch with us, and Paul and his team will happily go through that and pinpoint, where you might want changes, where you might need to do some extra work to get to that point, and obviously offer the resources to help you get there if that's good for you. I think that's enough to close now, Paul. Thanks very much. Very informative episode. And as you said, that journey from idea to mass production, super exciting. I'm hoping we see a lot of you guys who are listening, your products coming out in the near future.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share, because it will really help others discover us too.